I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. This week, I am gonna be going back to the listener crit roots and doing a solo installment. I've actually got a handful of poems in the backlog for listener crit. I'm going to be setting up talks with Alice and Cameron coming up, but I thought I would just dive in and tackle a couple of them myself. Before getting into all of that, though, I did want to offer my congratulations again to everybody who was a finalist or a finalist or a runner-up or honorable mention in the Frost Farm Poetry Prize that was judged by Ryan Wilson, my good friend this year, and Carla Galdo won a familiar name, though I don't know her personally. But man, Alice was the runner-up or finalist or shortlister, and the honorable mentions list is just filled with people from the SLEERICKETS Extended Universe. Maya Venters, Stephen Searcy, Cara Valle, I did not know was also a former student of Ryan's. She had a poem in Tar River Poetry. I didn't even know. Yeah, I didn't know anything about her, but I saw that was one of my three favorite poems from the current issue of Tar River, along with one of Maya's. And another one by a guy I didn't know. I had no idea who Cara Valle was, but I thought that was quite good. Ryan sent me some other poems and translations of hers that I thought were excellent, and she had two poems on the honorable mentions list, so hers is another name I will be keeping an eye out for. But congrats to everybody, especially our darling Alice. I don't think I've read this poem. Alice, Day Drinking After Visiting My Mother. I don't think I've read it. Sam said, don't put it into Google or you will get Google AI will be concerned about your mental health. But yeah, I'm very proud of our girl and of all of our friends. Speaking of friends, got some strong and mixed responses to the conversation with Daniel Cowper from last week. A case for didactic poetry. Yeah, I think the most of you seemed to be fans and mostly in agreement with him, except for the last 10 minutes of The Secret Show, which by far provoked the strongest responses. So go, if you have not listened to that episode yet, go check it out, and then go to sleerickets.substack.com and check out The Secret Show episode, because boy, that one really stirred things up. I am going to be talking with Brian about that and some related questions. There's an essay that Zena pointed out in the New Yorker about didacticism. Let's just say we're not done with the subject yet. But it was a fun episode, and I am always eager to hear from more of you. In fact, it looks like Coleman just now posted something in the Substack chat, so I look forward to seeing what he's got to say. Any other announcements? Oh, I am going to be doing a talk again with Jimmy. Jimmy Pappas has a former Rattle Chatbook Prize winner, I believe. He's got a little weekly seminar online, Zoom seminar that he does with a group that they do talks. They have guest speakers and readers, and it's real conversational, just poetry discussion session. I've done it once before. I'm going to be doing it again June 8th. I will put a link up as soon as I get one from Jimmy. And you can go, sign in and check it out. It'll just be a Zoom link. June 8th in the evening, U.S. Eastern Time. I think 7 p.m. is when it starts. And I'm going to be talking about poems of despair. So I think I am supposed to read some of my own work, but it's mostly going to be just a selection of some poems I really like that are not didactic. They're poems without hope. Maybe I got to come up with something a little sexier to sell that one, because I'm not sure that's going to do it, but would love to see any and all of you there. All right. So I have a couple of poems this week, one from N and one from J. I actually got Jay sent me a few and gave me my choice. I may mention briefly two of them, and then I'm going to focus on one in particular. And again, if you would like to submit a poem for Listener Crit for a public but anonymous and frank critique, all you have to do is sign up for the secret show. Go to SLEERICKETS.substack.com. It is very cheap, and you get an extra episode of SLEERICKETS every week, along with being able to send in stuff to Listener Crit episodes, and check out the Substack chat, see what Coleman and others are arguing about on there. I really dislike Substack Notes because it is a social media. I really dislike social media, but the Substack chat is like a group text thread, and it's just a little more private, and maybe for that reason a little more sane. I also post contests and opportunities, job listings, and things that I find out about. I post them on there, so give that a look. All right, so let's start with, I think this one's a little bit more difficult. So yeah, I'm going to start with Jay's poem. The one I'm going to talk about is called Portrait Taken in Patterson's Curse. I bought a Bronica around 18 in Birac, when the wings of flying ants gave dusk a glassy herb. Past me, a scene, a long mauve curse, frame raked across expanse. Advance, read light, turn lens, screen out, expose. Septic broad tract impressed on stock 8 times. The scene returned as cellulose meadows, acetic, dull, dye-stained microbic grime. A year on, I drove you past the fold. The mauve was blocked, then grained as we knelt low. A stone protruded through the nutlet bold. You climbed to hold the light in perfect slow. A skim of figured love, former to night. You pressed the shutter soft, seeing, eye bright. That's Portrait Taken in Patterson's Curse by Jay. So yeah, as I said, this is a sonnet. It is quite regular. I think it's all true rhyme with one exception, which is in the second quatrain. Times is rhymed with grime, which I realize a lot of you would not even consider to be a slant rhyme. It's not quite true, but it is certainly a very close to a perfect rhyme, and a lot of people would accept it as such. And then metrically, it's also quite regular. I think I noted 2 lines where the meter by my lights faltered a little bit. The scene returned as cellulose meadows. So meadows is rhymed with expose. I mean, I guess that's also not quite a true rhyme, because in order for it to be a rhyme, you need both of the syllables in question to be stressed. And meadows, the second syllable there is not stressed. So I think because that syllable is not stressed and it's preceded by cellulose, which is as a word is a dactyl, it ends up being a 4-foot line, basically. The scene returned as cellulose meadows. So if you're working in pentameter, I think that line stands out. The other one that stood out was, a year on, I drove you past the fold, which again is a 4-beat line. Yeah, I think the only way you could make it a 5-beat line is if you called it headless and you pronounced it in a really wrenched way as, a year on, I drove you past the fold. But I think that's just not, that's not at all a natural pronunciation. So yeah, those 2 lines stood out as being metrically anomalous, and there was the second quatrain. You have some some imprecision with the rhyme. I point that out not because you're not allowed to do that. I mean, that's the kind of rhyme that Larkin, whom I'm going to mention later, used to, make use of all the time. A wrenched rhyme where the vowel and consonant are identical, but the vowels and consonant sounds are identical, but the stress is a little off, or certainly, a very near rhyme like times and grime. But otherwise it's very consistent. And I think that's notable because this is, I think, a pretty good example of the actual phenomenon of rhyme sort of driving the bus, or a form driving the bus. So this is a poem in which, I think as you heard, it sounds great, with maybe a couple of those little faltering exceptions. It sounds great throughout. It is not a poem in which the rhymes or the meter feel forced, because one does not get the impression that the writer is making the form fit his intended meaning. Rather, he is allowing his meaning to follow the pleasure of the sound. The other side of that, right? If when you force your form to serve your meaning, right, you have the idea of what you want to say, and you twist the rhyme and the meter into service of that statement. When you do that, the rhymes and the meter really stand out as being forced. When you do the opposite, when you allow your denotation to serve the sound of the poem, what tends to stand out is not the rhyme or the meter. What stands out is the meaning as being a little bit strange or confusing or opaque at times. I think it is pretty consistently throughout this poem. Much of this poem, I think, is quite opaque in just literal sense. A thing I noticed, it's something I've noticed in reading, especially Australian poetry. I was thinking about, do I have this experience reading contemporary British poetry or, British Isles poetry? And the answer is probably, but maybe not quite as much. So anytime you use a proper noun or you make a specific reference to an existing text, but especially to an existing sort of social or commercial phenomenon, it's not a question of what's allowed. The question is, what effect does it have? And the experience I have as a dumb American reader when reading Australian poetry is that more often than with British poetry, I get I run into proper nouns and specific cultural references that leave me confused. And the obvious explanation for that is that I'm not Australian, right? I'm American. And so they're Australian references, and of course I don't get them, and that's just natural. And I have no doubt that American poems do the same thing. I do think that there's maybe, because this is why I was asking about the British thing. I think what maybe does happen with Australian poetry a little more than with British poetry, and maybe more than, American poetry is just so fucking big, is that I think in an effort to not to seem grand, not to get caught trying to be timeless or a marble statue guy on Twitter, which it feels like, again, like Australian poetry is allergic to the prospect of putting on airs. It does feel like, I get the feeling, and because again, the first person I noticed doing this was John Forbes. I just found I had to look up every other line in reading his poems in college. I had to look up what the fuck is he talking about. I think using a whole lot of small scale or culturally specific timely references can inoculate your work from seeming to be reaching after the universal or seeming to be reaching after the transcendent. It's sort of your plausible deniability is, I'm just talking about blokes and mates and stuff that's going bogans. I don't know why I'm using all these Australian, but I'm just talking about stuff happening in the present. I'm not trying to be immortal. And I think that the result of that, for me at least, is that often I just am lost in reading Australian poems. Setting aside whether it's an Australian thing, whether it's just that I'm not from Australia, it is notable that in this poem, and I mention this because I guess I'm outing Jay as an Australian here. In this poem, between the title and the first two lines, there are three notable proper nouns, all of which I had to look up. So the title is Portrait Taken in Patterson's Curse. And the first two lines are, I bought a Bronica around 18 in Birack when the wings of flying ants. Now, I had a vague memory that a Bronica was a camera. Turns out it is a camera. It's a specific Japanese medium format camera. So medium format meaning it's a bigger film negative than we're used to in like a 35 millimeter camera. Not that you Zoomers here even know what a 35 millimeter camera is. But it's like an artsy fartsy camera. My friend in high school, David, was big. I mean, it still is a serious photographer and had some sort of medium format. I don't know if it was a Bronica. So I had some vague memory that was what it was, but I still looked it up to confirm. Birack is a couple of things. It's a town in the Middle East, but it's also there's a footnote, I should say, to this poem. The footnote doesn't actually define anything in the poem, but it does refer to Cartesian Noongar, which means Noongar knowledge. Noongar being an Aboriginal group, or I think it's several tribes that are all considered Noongar among the Australian Aboriginal people, and Cartesian is the kind of traditional knowledge. So Birack is it's the beginning of summer in the Noongar calendar. Patterson's Curse is a kind of flower, like a weedy purple flower. To me, when I saw pictures of it, it looked like the kind of wildflower that would grow in a big long patch along the side of the road, on like a southern rural highway. Sort of pretty, but a little bit wild and a little bit probably hard to eradicate if you're trying to grow anything else. But just to note, like if you pack all three of those things into the very beginning of your poem, you're going to send, I mean, at least in my case, I had to go to the Google several times, right at the very top of the poem. And what followed, I think, continued to give me pause, even if not of the Googling variety. I bought a Bronica around 18 in Birack. That's all clear enough, right? I bought this particular fancy artsy camera when I was 18 in Birack. Portrait taken in Patterson's Curse, presumably a person in the, lying in or sitting in or standing near a patch of these flowers. I bought a camera around 18 in Birack in this time of year, this, early summer. I think there's 6 seasons in the Noongar calendar rather than 4. But the rest of that sentence, I think, then becomes syntactically a little bit difficult. When the wings of flying ants gave dusk a glassy herb, Herb. I don't literally know what that means. Now, it calls to mind certain images. Like the image that comes to mind is when you've got a lot of flying insects, especially, specifically flying ants, little tiny translucent wings flashing in the light, particularly if you are trying to take pictures, then it can give a kind of a funny shimmery quality to the air that might be evocative of either glass or like a weedy botanical texture. Again, it evokes a feeling, it evokes a sense, sort of, but it's very difficult to say denotatively what is actually being stated there. Past me, a scene. Past me is already tricky. Because what's the perspective? What's the point of view? Is this a self-portrait? Have you set up the Bronica on a tripod and you're taking a picture of yourself and then you're looking at the picture later? You're looking at the background of that picture later? It's just not clear maybe that's what's happening, but past me a scene. A long mauve curse frame raked across expanse. A long mauve curse, so that's the patch of these weedy flowers, frame raked, that's hyphenated, across expanse. So it's not across the expanse. Frame raked, the frame being the rectangular space within which the image is exposed. Frame raked. So it's raked across the frame, across the expanse. Again, by mushing these words together, you convey an impression of maybe a sort of a sense, but it's not really a clearly built grammatical sentence. That's neither good nor bad. I think the dual effect is that in reading lines like this, I do get a sort of a hovering mental picture. But being somebody who tends to read for voice, to read to hear a voice speaking, I do get very frustrated at these sorts of constructions. Just a note here, I was going to say, this is true, I think, for all three of these poems that Jay sent in. There's a real divergence here between two or a few different kinds of ways of reading poetry, because the impression I had reading this poem and the other poems overall was I am frustrated by this. I do not hear very much of a human recognizable voice. The grammar is all chopped up and mushed together. I get sort of there are stirring and pleasing combinations of words here, and I receive sometimes confusing but often kind of striking sensory images, but I don't feel like I'm listening to a person talking. And I keep sort of straining against that impression to try to make a sense out of it that I don't think the poem wants to make. However, I also thought, holy shit, Cameron would love this. Like, I actually, like, whatever else you want to do, I'm not finished talking about this poem, Jay, but like whatever else you want to do with my advice, I mean, I think if you wanted to, you could send these poems to Cameron, put in a plug for him, literarymatterssubmissions@gmail.com. literarymatterssubmissions@gmail.com. Don't join the ALCW. Ignore their requirements on the website. Just send your poems there. If you were interested, I can't speak for him. I don't work for the magazine anymore, but my impression was, boy, would Cameron like this. So I just was looking at Milton yesterday. I was looking at the L'Allegro, Il Penseroso, and Lycidas, sort of three of his most famous kind of mid-length poems. And they're very Cameronic, and they're very Jay-esque too, in that he's a brilliant writer of great sounding lines and dazzling combinations of words. There's so many little phrases from those three poems that pop up elsewhere in English vernacular. It was funny. One of the more famous phrases from Lycidas, "Trip the light fantastic." What's interesting about it is that it bears out this point in that in the context of the poem, the phrase is trip appears on the previous line, but then he refers to the light fantastic toe, and he's talking about dancing. But apparently the footnote said that the toe got dropped from conventional references to the line because it was so well known that you didn't need to mention the toe. But then at some point, people forgot there was a toe. And so tripping the light fantastic becomes this phrase that it sounds good. It's a catchy phrase. It sticks in the ear. But people use it to mean something totally different. People use it to mean, honestly, often it's not even clear what they mean. But it sort of, as the footnote said, it sort of vaguely calls to mind like a busy neon lit street where lots of commerce is taking place, which really has nothing to do with the poem at all. But that seems to me very much in the spirit of those three poems, none of which seem especially emotionally sincere, but all of which are filled with dazzling language. And they seem like they're all three just sort of excuses for riffing descriptions and series of phrases built beautifully and brilliantly toward the end of, churning out some great verbal content. But what I don't get when I read those three poems is a sympathetic or especially credible speaker. And I certainly don't get a sense of a very credible emotional investment from the speaker. I get, three occasions for doing cool stuff with words. And I don't say that dismissively. It's not my cup of tea, but it is fucking Milton. And it is Cameron. I mean, this is really, I won't say that's all Cameron's interested in, but it's a lot of what Cameron's interested in. And it's a lot of what a lot of really smart readers of poetry are interested in. And it is what it seems like Jay is interested in here. So, I'm giving you my response, but boy, you are definitely doing something that some readers of poetry would be very interested in just as it stands. I don't want to attribute Milton's insincerity to Jay, because I don't get the feeling that this is like a callous or unfeeling or cynical poem. It does feel like there's some real personal investment here. Unfortunately, it's hard for me to say what that adds up to. I do quite like the line, advance, this is following to the next stanza, advance, read light, turn lens, screen out, expose. These are all terms that, by my light seem to be kind of narrating the internal experience of setting up a photograph with a manual analog camera. Advance, read light, turn lens, screen out, expose. The less automatic it is, the more you have to do yourself consciously by hand when you're taking a photograph. Even though that's not the way anybody would construct a spoken line of dialogue, it's very much an accurate evocation of the stream of consciousness when doing something like setting up an analog camera shot. What follows, though, after the colon, advance, read light, turn lens, screen out, expose, colon, is septic, broad, tract, impressed on stock 8 times. So it's not that I can't guess at what this means. Septic generally refers to sepsis, that sort of terrible infection, or the content of a sewer. But in context here, I suspect that what Jay means by septic is of the 7th degree. Sept, like 7. I'm guessing. But you can't use that term without also calling to mind for the reader the other meanings of the word septic. Septic, broad, tract, impressed on stock 8 times. So you're filming a big expanse of Patterson's Curse, this flower. It's a tract. It's a stretch of this flower or of grass, the flower's growing out of. It's you're taking a photograph, so you're exposing light. You're exposing the film to light, so it's impressed in that sense. On stock, film stock, 8 times, 8 negatives, maybe, I guess. So I think I kind of I can come up with a reasonable theory about what's being said here. I'm not sure exactly why it's of the 7th degree, except that there are a lot of numbers involved in tweaking a camera's settings in order to get a good exposure. But again, what strikes me is just that Jay seems interested in how this line sounds, and it sounds pretty good, even if it's not all that clear. The scene returned as cellulose meadows. So cellulose, some of the matter, the matter of the film. The scene you saw the scene, and then it came back later when you developed the film. What would be different if you had just said the scene returned as cellulose, right? It was the meadows returned as cellulose. So again, it just seems like what's happening there is truly the sound is dictating the sense. Ascetic, that's not ascetic, that's ascetic, acetic, which I thought meant, acidic or vinegary, but because I wasn't sure, I looked it up again. So just, letting you know, you sent me back to look things up again there. Acetic dull dye-stained microbic grime. Acetic dull dye-stained all sounds like it's having to do with film development. Microbic grime. I don't know. I could guess. Maybe that has to do with the other meaning of septic. Maybe there's a contamination in the film or the paper, photographic paper. I don't know. I could guess, but it doesn't feel like the poem is all that interested in having me understand the denotation. It seems interested in having me enjoy the texture of the language and the sound of the words. A year on, I drove you past the fold. Again, pastoral images come to mind, but I think fold refers to the flock, right? Not the... Oh, maybe it is. No. It is in British English, the dictionary says, an undulation or gentle curve of the ground. Okay, a year on, I drove you past the fold. The mauve was blocked. I don't know what that means. The mauve, the color of the flower was blocked. I don't know what it means for that to be blocked. Thin grained as we knelt low. Again, these words could mean something in proximity to one another, but it's not clear precisely what is being said here. A stone protruded through the nutlet bold. The only meaning I could find for the word nutlet was a small nut. And if a stone is protruding through a small nut and the nutlet is bold, I'm just completely lost. It sounds almost like that. There's that like Middle English riddle about the cherry that has no stone, and that's what came to mind here. I just felt like, what are we talking about? It sounds good. I have no idea what it means. You climbed to hold the light in perfect slow. In perfect slow. It's a phrase that I don't love it because it feels like I kind of see what you're going for, but it doesn't feel it doesn't feel idiomatically plausible. You climbed to hold the light in perfect slow. Taking a picture, presumably in perfect slow, you do have to control timing and exposure, but in perfect slow feels self-conscious. A skim of figured love, former to night. I don't know really what that means. I could make guesses. I see it. I have associated meanings with the various words, but I don't really know what it means. You pressed the shutter soft. Really not the shut. You press the button to make the shutter open to expose the film. And you press the button softly, but you press the shutter soft as sort of a collapsing of that. Seeing eyebright is the last two words. Again, sound good in context. A skim of figured love, former tonight. You pressed the shutter soft, seeing eye bright. Maybe you're saying that the eye of the photographer was bright, but seeing seems entirely redundant, and eye bright seems like it's flirting with redundancy there. So again, denotatively and in terms of voice, I did find this poem very frustrating, but it sounds great, and it has lots of interesting language in it. And this may just be a matter of taste, because again, I think my impression is that if these poems had appeared in the Literary Matters slush pile, I would bet $1 that Cameron would accept them. I'll say that. But they just feel so much like the stuff he is into. And I don't think it's even that he would have no quarrel with it. It's just that I think it is doing a lot of the stuff that he is interested in poetry doing, and that many poems don't do. Most poems that come into that submission pile don't bother with this kind of like rich and challenging texture. So on the one hand, congratulations. On the other, it's very much not my cup of tea, and I do have specific complaints about it. But writing 14 lines that sound great and are, for the most part, linguistically surprising throughout, that's not a mean feat at all. If it were me, I would want to, I think this is, if we talk about the ghost and the Ouija board, this is a poem where the Ouija board is writing the poem, right? The form, the letters on the board are finding a pattern pleasing to themselves, and the ghost is being left sort of in the dust. I think, I would want to, there are cases where the ghost writes the poem, board be damned. But this one feels like it's the other end. And by my lights, I would prefer a little more balance between those two forces. I'll read it one more time because again, it sounds fucking great. Portrait Taken in Patterson's Curse by Jay. I bought a Bronica around 18 in Birac when the wings of flying ants gave dusk a glassy herb. Past me, a scene, a long mauve curse, frame raked across expanse. Advance, read light, turn lens, screen out, expose. Septic broad tract impressed on stock 8 times. The scene returned as cellulose meadows. Acetic, dull dye-stained microbic grime. A year on, I drove you past the fold. The mauve was blocked, then grained as we knelt low. A stone protruded through the nutlet bold. You climbed to hold the light in perfect slow. A skim of figured love, former to night. You pressed the shutter soft, seeing, eye bright. Yes, yeah, so the other two poems Jay sent in, one was a prose poem about the so Morton Bay fig is a kind of fig tree. This one says Mortum Bay fig, like the Latin word for death. So I wasn't totally sure what was happening there. Prose poem, and the other one is a poem in lines that are visually regular, but metrically irregular. It's sort of flirting with like a 14er line. 14er being the old term for iambic heptameter, 7 foot line. So it's what Stallings translated Lucretius's De Rerum Natura. She translated into English 14er couplets, I believe. So it's sort of that, roughly a 14er line, but not very consistently. And there's sort of one rhyming couplet that gets repeated, sort of. But, for what it's worth, reading these 3 poems in a row, particularly, the poem in 14ers-ish is also about a camera. It's called Viewfinder. It mentions a camera. The other poem, is about looking at some natural landscapes and images, and there's a lot of emphasis across these poems on the visual experience. There's even I was reminded of Wayne's World, because there's a bit where he refers to my left eye and my right eye, but the eye is the pronoun I, which felt to me a little bit ham-fisted. Again, this is sort of one of the more self-conscious. That's one of the moments where you felt the conscious mind in interfering. Maybe that's my ghost and Ouija board metaphor is flawed, because there's the ghost, there's the Ouija board, and then there's the people using the board who sometimes force force the teacup, or force the little, what do you call the thing you move? James Merrill used a teacup. But reading these 3 poems together, I did get a sense of what Jay seems to be, like the game he seems to be playing with poetry, but they all felt, at least on an initial reading, they all felt sort of interchangeable, right? Like one of the things you lose when you give up a kind of a crisp denotation and a very clear speaking voice is a sense of what makes one poem really distinct from another beyond which particular sonic pleasures or which particular verbal textures emerge here versus there. And, reading these 3 in a row, they felt sort of fungible. Like, it didn't feel like if you picked up a line from one and you plugged it into the other, allowing for, tweaking the form a little bit, it wouldn't denotatively at least stand out as being really out of place. It felt like a line from one kind of could be a line in another. Again, that's not good, bad, or otherwise, but honestly, same feeling I have with Milton. Like, Il Penseroso and L'Allegro are written in tetrameter couplets mostly, and Lycidas is written in pentameter couplets mostly. But apart from that, I kind of feel like you could just switch the point. Like, obviously, like Il Penseroso and L'Allegro, the whole point is they're contrasting and they're very parallel and in deliberate disagreement. In one of them, he banishes melancholy, and in the other one, he welcomes melancholy. Like, again, among the dumber treatments of melancholy in like the great English tradition. It's dumber. I would say dumber than Keats's treatment of melancholy in his great ode, which is not my favorite of Keats's. And it's just a silly treatment of melancholy. But like, really, even though those, the two poems in tetrameter are kind of arguing with each other, you could kind of pick up a line or a phrase from any one of those three poems and plug it into one of the others, and you wouldn't really notice, because the individual poem, like the unity of the individual poem, is not really at stake. So take that for what it's worth. But again, holy shit, you should be submitting poems to Cameron. He would, again, I can't speak for him. None of this is binding, but man, I think he would love this shit. Thank you so much, Jay, for sending these in. All right, let's look at In's poem, which is called The 4 Ages of Love. And it has little headings. It's 4 stanzas, and it has a little heading above each stanza. So I had a little exchange with In. He had an earlier version where he just used standalone numbers before each of the stanzas. And when I looked at them, because I'm so used to poem formatting getting jumbled up as it's transmitted across, like across from one doc to a email to a PDF or whatever. I'm used to things getting jumbled up, and often people will copy paste in from a larger document. So I saw those little numbers, and what I initially thought was I was looking at like the numbers that often will crop up when you copy paste something from a big text online, and they're little marginal numbers marking like the number of lines, like you see in the the Norton Anthology of Poetry, or if you look at any long poem on, I want to say, Bartleby.com, which used to be a really good source and then got really junked up with ads. You get little marginal numbers for what line you're on, and that's kind of how I read and visually dismissed those. But that is not what In was intending, and he clarified that in this version. The first heading is 20 years old. The second heading is 40, then 60, then 80. So we're talking about years, not lines. So this is The 4 Ages of Love by N. I pick you out a shell, and in return you choose a pebble painted by the tide, with blood-red markings shimmering like flames ignited by the sea. In landlocked times to come, your stone will resurrect the past we loved, with pungent seaweed, raucous gulls, and waves that smacked and hissed against the rocks as limpets sat it out in silent pools. 40. I'm living far inland these days. My heart curates its memories of you, but I prefer to face the facts instead. No memory can bring you back again in flesh and blood. I ask somebody else to be my wife, then hear her tell a friend the odds are I'm the best that she can do. If all we share is resignation, it might be enough. 60. An undemanding marriage doesn't come with conversation. That's an optional attachment, which we didn't order. So we don't communicate. She seems to cope. She merely lets my presence slip her mind and gets to try on widowhood for size. She turns the light off as she leaves the room. I look up from my book, but she is gone. 80. She keeps her distance. I revive a dream. You're close beside me on our makeshift bench, an ancient driftwood log just out to sea. 2 dinghies ride at anchor, and their lines trade lazy, random backslaps with the masts. You lean against me as I put my arm around you, our embrace the final touch. My heart, your stone, saving their best for last. All right, so this is in blank verse for the most part. There is that little rhyme at the end. There's some near rhymes, but they're not regular enough for me to. Well, no, there's wife, enough, gulls, pools, time and tide, come, room, dream and arm, I kind of like as a slant rhyme. Then most notably at the end, you have masts, and then the last line it ends with last. Masts and last. So again, not quite a true rhyme, but close enough, and given its placement at the end, seemingly deliberate and certainly notable as a sonic effect. The meter's quite regular throughout. I was trying to see if I marked any lines that felt funny. Yeah, so there's one line, the second line of the second stanza, curates its memories of you, but I prefer, as 6 feet. And then, then the second line of the third stanza, with conversation, that's an optional. A little bit of a weak last foot there, optional. You need it to be pronounced, really. But not deadly. But just took, made a note there. But yeah, for the most part, very, very regular meter. Sounds good, I think. It sounds good. It doesn't feel like sound is purely driving the poem. What does seem to be the case here is it does feel very conscious. So there's this thing that comes up in conversation with people who are not into poetry, and it's always kind of a difficult question, right? So the question is put a number of different ways, but like the way I've probably most often heard it phrased is, why don't poets just say what they mean? Why don't they just come right out and say it? Why do they have to beat around the bush? Why do they have to be vague and confusing? Why do they have to use symbols and metaphors? Maybe the way I least like to hear this question said, or implied rather, is when school teachers ask, what is the poet trying to say here? Which is just insulting at every level. But I think the readerly question, why don't poets just say what they mean, sometimes gets laughed off by people who have a lot of experience with poetry. But I think that's unfair. I think it's actually a good question. Why don't poets just say what they mean? And the question comes to mind for me also when I read a poem in which the poet does just say what he means. It's tricky, right? If you want to write a love poem, why not just say, I love you so, so, so much? And it would make me very sad if you ever went away. So I really don't want you to, because being with you makes me happy. And I hope that we get to spend the rest of our lives together and cuddle and have a good time, right? Why can't that be a love poem? And, maybe you say that, but you say it in meter and rhyme, so it's got a little more jazz to it. But why isn't that a moving love poem? It's totally sincere. We've all felt, I think most of us have felt something like that for somebody at some point. We can understand it. It's human. It's fairly universal. It's real. We might talk that way to our close loved ones, but it just isn't a very good poem. And that's not the level at which, N's poem is much more sophisticated than that. But like, I think it's a good question. Like, why is that not a good love poem? Why doesn't that do anything to us? And the image that came to mind was, because I am at heart a nerd, was an image from Dune. So in the world of Dune, one of the kind of interesting technological, I think this was part of the reason my dad really liked it, because his other big complaint about the Baz Luhrmann Romeo and Juliet movie was that he used guns. And so you lost all the fun of sword fights, right? Because Romeo and Juliet has a number of sword fights in it, and sword fights are really fun to watch. I know it was one of the things he really liked about Star Wars was that it's set in the future, or not. I mean, I don't know, like the distant past, it's past, future, galactic, whatever. But like it's they have extremely advanced technology, but they found a way to bring back swords because swords are just fucking cool to watch. It's more fun to watch people have a sword fight than have a gunfight. Right, unless you're, I guess that's the whole premise of like the John Wick movies is basically you like guys fight with guns the way they would fight with swords, so it becomes fun to watch again. So Star Wars found one way to bring swords into a high tech environment. Dune found another. Right, so in the technological timeline of the Dune novels, they've developed this technology that basically protects you against high-speed attacks, right? You have this energy field that protects you from lasers, protects you from bullets, and the accommodation is this is the line from the novel: the shield turns the fast blow, admits the slow kinjal. The kinjal is a kind of dagger. I want to say like a Persian dagger. Oh, it's from the Caucasus. So the point, though, is that these shields, you can fire a bullet at them and the bullet will bounce off. You can fire a laser at them and the laser will get absorbed or deflected. But if you move slowly through the shield, you can cut with a knife. So the shield turns the fast blow, admits the slow kinjal. This was translated, I think, a little bit more memorably into the line in the movie version of the Denis Villeneuve version of the movie. The line is, "The slow blade penetrates the shield." Right. So if you are fighting somebody who has a shield, this is why you don't have gunfights. You have sword fights or knife fights. And so you are basically, you clash with your enemy, but you can't actually break through the shield if you are swinging it fast. You have to trick your enemy and get close enough that you can slowly move your knife through the shield. Because if you try to move it too quickly, it'll bounce off. It'll get deflected. You have to sneak in there. And that image came to mind because I think that's how humans are emotionally, right? Like we're big, mushy, empathic creatures. And if we walked around totally exposed, I was talking to my daughter yesterday about how like the tissue inside your body is so delicate, right? We've all like had the experience of like having, like you get a fingernail peeled back a little bit, and just the quick underneath the fingernail, so tender, so delicate. It takes very little. The skin lining your eyelids, any sort of skin that's, the skin around your genitals, like anywhere where there's a kind of an opening, that internal flesh is so tender. We need the thicker, tougher, epidermis to protect it. And I think we are that way emotionally as well, right? When we are really vulnerable, when we are really exposed and naked and intimate and close to somebody, and we can trust that person, and we've opened ourselves up to that person, we're very delicate on the inside. It's very easy to hurt us. That's why when you are really close to somebody you love, you can speak in those very plain, frank, unguarded ways, and it matters because you consider the source. If your spouse says to you, "I hate you," that's brutal. That's devastating. if a crazy guy on the street says to you, I hate you, you think like, oh, I got to cross the street. So because we have this emotional vulnerability, we've learned to protect ourselves. We encounter words all the time in public and private life. And although we have a kind of a vulnerability to those who are already close to us, we've turned our shields off when we're around them, right? We're exposed. They could shoot us if they wanted to, because we have no shields up. The energy field is off when we're around them. They're inside the field. They're inside that shield. But with the rest of the world, his shields are up. So they can fire all sorts of nonsense they want at us, and it's not going to penetrate. We've learned to ignore ads. We've learned to ignore political speech. We've learned to ignore junk mail, right? Or sales speech. People come to the door and they, want to sell you something. People talk to you on the street, try to get you to join their religion or repent or buy something or chip in for their basketball team trip or whatever. And we are callous, right? We harden ourselves against those words coming from the outer world. And so if we hear a frank claim of emotion from that outer world, it will mean nothing to us. It will bounce right off us because our shields are up. But that's where lyric poetry comes in, because here's the thing about lyric poetry. Now, a person who is already your intimate can hurt you very easily, can say something very blunt, very plain, very simple, and cut you like a knife because they're already up close to you. They're already inside that shield. But the same is not true from the outside. And a lyric poem attempts to do that from the outside. My sort of dumb refrain when people ask me what I want my poems to do is I say I want my poems to break a stranger's heart. That's what I want. If you pick up my poem, if you walk into a cafe and a poem of mine is sitting on the cafe table and you have zero reason to read it, you have no obligation whatsoever to read a single word of it. But if you happen to read the first line, then I want you to want to read the second line. And I want you to want to read the rest of the poem after that. And if you read it as a total stranger picking it up in a cafe with no obligation whatsoever, I want that poem to break your fucking heart. I want it to draw blood. But it's words coming from the outer world. Your shields are up. You are ready to turn away a panhandler. You're ready to click skip on an ad. You're ready to ignore a political flyer. You're ready to eavesdrop but not care about it's a stranger conversation at the next table. This is why people like laugh at men who fall in love with strippers. I say this like I have one of my good friends is actually in like a long-term relationship with someone he met because she was his stripper. But he is uniquely charming. Do not take him as a model. He is an outstanding specimen of a man. She's actually a lovely, lovely woman as well. I like both of them a lot. But like the reason people make fun of men who fall in love with strippers is that that's language from the outer world. Like a stripper is taking her clothes off from you for you in front of you for money, and she's showing interest in you for money. She's doing her job. And it's not that strippers are liars or insincere. It's that the context is public. This is the outer world. And so then when you respond to that as if it's an actual intimate treating you this way, as if it's like somebody you know personally taking her clothes off in front of you and sitting in your lap and cozying up to you and asking you about your day, when you respond to a stripper that way, you seem like a fool. Right? You're like a guy who thinks that the TV commercial is directed to him because you're not making the distinction. Your shields aren't up, even though you're dealing with the outer world. A lyric poem, a successful lyric poem, penetrates those shields. It draws blood even though you've got all of your energy fields up. And it has to do that sneakily. It has to do that on the sly. The slow blade penetrates the shield. It has to catch you when you're not looking. It has to feint and deflect and misdirect and get you to turn in one direction so it can sneak around the other side and slowly drive the blade in. And that's why poets don't just say what they mean. Not because they are lying, not because they're tricking you, not because they're Andrew Zawacki, I think was the guy's name, who made the point of writing out his whole first book and then deliberately went back and altered every line so as to make it less understandable. I mean, that stuff drives me fucking crazy. Nonsense poetry drives me crazy. Poetry that truly doesn't care what the reader understands or doesn't want the reader to understand, that stuff drives me crazy. But there is a reason poets don't just come out and say, I love you so much, you're the best, gal. Let's live together forever. Right? Because it doesn't penetrate the shield. And I think that is the biggest problem with this poem by N, The 4 Ages of Love. I think there's some really strong material in here. I think it does sound quite good. And for being very denotatively coherent, it is also very sonically pleasing. It's a very steady and yet not sing-songy blank verse. But so much of this poem feels mawkishly, earnestly straightforward. We can see what you're going for, but it doesn't affect us. I think that applies to the title, right? The 4 Ages of Love. What is he talking about here? Well, he's talking about the experience of erotic love across 4 different ages in your life. You know, when you're 20 years old, and this is sort of in the realm of first love. When you're 40, when you're in middle age, when you're 60, when you're sort of in the toward the end of life, and then when you're 80 at the end of life, you experience some version, you have some encounter with erotic love, and it's different at each of those stages. And the title just says that directly in a way that this is the opposite of the Australian problem, right? Australian poetry doesn't want to get caught trying to be universal, doesn't want to get caught trying to speak grandly or from a mountaintop or to pronounce about the way life is at large. It tries to keep things small and specific and local and unpretentious. And the risk here with a poem called The 4 Ages of Love, in which you just very straightforwardly discuss the experience of love at 4 ages, is that you are caught out in the open making big, broad emotional claims. And we can totally see what you're going for. And it is easy to embarrass yourself that way. And I think that does happen a little bit here. I pick you out a shell, and in return you choose a pebble painted by the tide with blood-red markings shimmering like flames ignited by the sea. You're trading love tokens. One person in the, I think the speaker's male, he picks out a shell and she picks out a pebble with blood-red markings shimmering like flames. I had a, exchange with N about, I think it was these lines or something very similar in an earlier draft. And he said, well, did you get that the stone is a symbol for the heart? And I said, well, no, and yet basically yes. Like I got that these were love tokens that were sort of very straightforward symbols of their affection, and that one of them was specifically meant to evoke the heart, blood-red markings. Didn't occur to me consciously, but also it almost didn't matter because I got the same idea because it's all very open-faced. And my fear is just that all of this is bouncing off the shield, that none of these blades penetrate. We're seeing 2 young people trading love tokens, and it's not that we can't relate. It's not that we haven't experienced something like this. It's not that we don't know that people fairly universally do things like this. It's just that none of this feels urgent or especially, none of this has beguiled me. None of this has won me over. I just feel like I'm watching. There was a couple when we were in high school. They were both a little bit socially inept, and the two of them, they were both people who were a little awkward, a little over. They tended to share a little too much and tended to be so guileless as to frequently embarrass themselves in kind of minor ways socially. And then the two of them both like hit like puberty o'clock at the same moment and got super horny together, and they fell in love. And so then there was this stretch when the two of them were just constantly making out all over campus. You just walk by and they would just be just groping and just, tongues down each other's throats on the bench in the middle of the day. It was like, again, it's not that we don't all do that. It's not that we couldn't all relate. We were all horny teenagers, but it was so embarrassing because there was no part of what they were doing that was not just staggeringly exposed for your assessment, even though you were not primed to be vulnerable, even though you had your shields up and at 100% power, right? And I think that's what happens here when the poem just starts out with this very sincere, sort of childlike exchange of love tokens. I've said before that the line in John Donne's Holy Sonnet 14, I think it's 14, Batter my heart, three-person God, for you is bread. Oh God, do I have it? Batter my heart, three-person God, for you as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend, that I may rise and stand, or throw me and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. I, like an usurped town, to another due, labor to admit you, but owe to no end. Reason your viceroy in me should defend, but is captived and proves weak or untrue. Yet dearly I love you, and would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto thine enemy. Betroth me. Fuck, no, not betrothed. Divorce me, the opposite of betroth me. Divorce me, untie me, or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me. So that line appears right at the volta, right when the rhyme scheme shifts from the octave to the sestet. Yet dearly I love you, and would be loved fain. And it's touching then. But as I said before, you couldn't start the poem in that line because it wouldn't do a goddamn thing. Sorry, shouldn't take the Lord's name in vain when quoting Holy Sonnet 14. It wouldn't do a thing. You couldn't start the poem, yet dearly I love you and would be loved fain. You have to trick us. You have to beguile us. You have to bring us in through another entrance. And I think that's the problem, is that this poem starts out, yet dearly I love you and would be loved fain, and it stays in that mode throughout the poem. There is this little figure of the sea being sort of the source of kind of emotional honesty and vulnerability. In landlocked times to come, your stone will resurrect the past we loved. I have some qualms, but in landlocked times to come, and then later in the second stanza you say, I'm living far inland these days, and we return to the beach later. I was reminded of both Eliot's, the Wasteland, he talks about being in the dry land with no water. Where water there is, I think, kind of a figure for faith. But I also thought of Odysseus. Pedro Poitevin has that poem in Literary Matters about Odysseus' last journey, where in order to make amends to Poseidon, he has to carry an oar inland far enough that until he has to keep carrying it inland until he reaches a place where people think that he's carrying a fan, because they've never seen an oar before, because they've never seen the ocean before. And when he finds those people who have no knowledge of the ocean at all, that is where he's supposed to build a shrine or a temple to Poseidon. So I thought of that. I think it's a potentially rich figure, being landlocked, being inland, as being sort of away from some source of vitality. But again, the argument is all just extremely flat and open-faced and frank, even when there is a figure being used. Your stone will resurrect the past we loved. I mean, that's sort of pure symbol. It's not an allegory. It's not a tenor in a vehicle. It's just sort of pure. The stone stands for the heart. The heart, your heart symbolizing stone will resurrect the past. Why? Why would a stone or why would a heart? I don't know. It's just sort of a bald statement of abstract truth. Will resurrect the past we loved. Again, the past we loved is a little bit of the hot tub of meaning. It's like the J poems where I get what you're going for. I get what you mean. You loved, you were happy, and you loved each other, and that was in the past. But it's just not quite accurate to say it's the past we loved. Certainly, when you loved it, it wasn't the past. It's a slightly imprecise use of language. Pungent seaweed, raucous gulls, and waves that smacked and hissed against the rocks as limpets sat it out in silent pools. I don't really know what it means to say limpets sat it out. What are they sitting out? Are they waiting something out? Are they not participating in something? But other than that, the limpets and the pools, I mean, there's some really great evocative images there. And I think you could build a larger figure having to do with, proximity to sea as having something to do with vitality. But right now, it's just sort of laid out there on the table, and we are asked to take it all on faith. The poem gets more interesting when we leave that period of total guileless youth. I'm living far inland these days. My heart curates its memories of you. There again, it's absolute, open-faced, unguarded, just clanging up against that shield. My heart curates its memories of you, but I prefer to face the facts. Face the facts is a cliche, meaning it's just sort of a pat phrase. We've heard that specific combination of words in sequence repeated, countless times. That's a little, we hit that like a patch of oil on the road, like a patch of dead skin. It has no effect on us because we've just heard it so many times. It doesn't even sound like a voice speaking. It sounds like the crowd. Das Man, as Heidegger would say. Same with Flesh and Blood, another cliche. Also, the poem ends on a cliche, saving the best for last. Again, it's not good, bad, or otherwise. It's just that when you use cliched language in a poem, we tune out slightly because we're not hearing you. We're not hearing the voice of the poem. We're hearing anybody's voice. We're hearing just vulgar speech that belongs to the crowd and refers only broadly to vague realities. It doesn't feel like it names anything specific. No memory can bring you back in Flesh and Blood. Then I think, so the first half of that stanza I think is very dull and obvious and sort of ham-fisted, but the second half is much more interesting. I ask somebody else to be my wife, then hear her tell a friend the odds are I'm the best that she can do. If all we share is resignation, it might be enough. That's complicated. That's some nuance and some painful reality. You're talking about real, serious emotional commitments, but you're also talking about them it doesn't feel like the speaker is being cynical. It seems like he's being realistic and kind of accepting an unromantic life that is available. That's so much more interesting than what was happening earlier. And it can still be moving. That begins to get past the shield. That begins to get under our skin. We might recognize ourselves in lines like that. I ask somebody else to be my wife, then hear her tell a friend the odds are I'm the best that she can do. If all we share is resignation, it might be enough. Next stanza, that's 40. The next stanza is 60. An undemanding marriage doesn't come with conversation. That's an optional attachment which we didn't order, so we don't communicate. There, I think, is get into a little bit of trouble with just sort of, is this true? An undemanding marriage doesn't come with conversation. I think there are marriages that are undemanding. Undemanding marriage is a little bit of a clumsy construction. There are marriages where people don't talk, but it's not clear that the larger statement being made here is true. And then the explanation, which we didn't order so we don't communicate, that just feels like a tautology. Like, we didn't decide to have conversations so we don't have conversations. And personally, I think conversation is an optional attachment. I get the figure, and it's not a cliched figure exactly there. It is a very vulgar one, but it feels like that's sort of the wrong direction, right? Like, the vulgarity is the compromise. It's not the possibility of real communication wouldn't be the commercial compromise, right? That would be a chance for real intimacy. So it just feels like that feels like a cynical moment. The other parts of the poem feel like this sort of painful reckoning with reality. That feels like a slightly imprecise moment of cynicism. But I'm interested in the experience of a marriage where you don't talk to each other. And then she seems to cope. She merely lets my presence slip her mind and gets to try on widowhood for size. I'm interested in that gets to try on widowhood for size, but it does seem like it's doing a lot of interpreting from a distance of the wife's experience in a way that might be accurate, but we again have to sort of take the speaker's word for it. And I'm interested in the conceit of trying on widowhood for size, but I have no idea what that means because we don't get to see any of what it means. The cliche in writing classes, as we've said before, is show don't tell. If my annoying refinement of that advice is evoke, don't explain. So I'm interested in getting to try on widowhood for size, but I'm sort of, all I am is kind of curious about it because that's all I get to experience. But I love the end of that stanza. She turns the light off as she leaves the room. I look up from my book, but she is gone. Boy, that right there, I mean, that is showing successfully. That is it shows us a lot, right? She turns the light off when she leaves the room. She didn't even know he was there. I look up from my book, but she is gone. It's not even a moment where he's mad. He's not even mad. He doesn't yell at her. Before he can even remind her he exists, he's in another world, right? He's reading his book. He's not paying attention to her. She's not paying attention to him. But it's like she's not there. It's like they're in different rooms. Those two lines do a lot of work that I think the rest of that stanza is struggling to do. The last stanza, 80, she keeps her distance. That's another cliche. Again, not good, bad, or otherwise, but it's a phrase we've heard countless times. Keep my distance. Keep your distance. Not wrong, but you're at risk there of losing us, of losing the sense that of surrendering the sense that we're actually hearing a specific speaker saying a specific thing rather than just general words being said in a general way. She keeps her distance. I revive a dream. There again, it feels very much like this is symbolic talking. We're not, what does it specifically mean to revive a dream? You could have a dream. You could remember something. But I revive a dream. That feels very much like, that feels like therapy speak. You're close beside me on our makeshift bench. So this, and I'm not sure what's different there. I don't know what's the difference between saying I revive a dream, I revive a dream, and I have a dream. I dream you're close beside me on our makeshift bench, right? What would be the difference? An ancient driftwood log just out to sea. Oh yeah, sorry, there's a semicolon there. An ancient driftwood log just out to sea. 2 dinghies ride at anchor, and their lines trade lazy random backslaps with the masts. You lean against me as I put my arm around you. That scene, dreaming of this other person from when you were young, and I believe this moment. It feels like a real moment, real evocative, convincing imagery. It feels grounded. It feels like I have a physical sense of this reality, sitting with this person, putting your arm around her, watching the sea. There's a peace. There's a light figure in the 2 boats. Feels like a figure for something like a happier coming to rest, a happier conclusion two people living together than the one that the speaker is actually experiencing. Then the end of the poem, I think we shift back to that kind of that broad, symbolic, take my word for it, claims of emotion. Our embrace, the final touch, my heart, your stone, saving the best for last. You're just bouncing right off our shields there. We're watching you sing with your eyes closed. We don't get to feel any of that. But again, I think the second half of that second stanza, I ask somebody else to be my wife, then hear her tell a friend the odds are I'm the best that she can do. If all we share is resignation, it might be enough. The end of the third stanza, she turns the light off as she leaves the room. I look up for my book, but she is gone. And then the first 2/3 or so of that last stanza, she keeps her, you're close beside me on our makeshift bench, an ancient driftwood log, just out to sea, two dinghies ride at anchor, and their lines trade lazy random backslaps with the masts. You lean against me as I put my arm around you. It's not that those three sections put together make a poem. It's that you've got real material there, and you are dealing with a real question, right? The question of compromise, the question of living a life that's not a terrible life, but is not really a happy one when there is another happy one that you imagine you could have and that you remember almost having. That's powerful stuff that I think that's the sort of stuff that could make us break a stranger's heart, could draw blood, could slip through the shield. But the rest of the poem is just telegraphing emotional moves, and it's putting us all off. I've long been trying to articulate the precise difference between corniness and cheesiness, because I do think it's an interesting. They are used interchangeably sometimes, but I think there is an essential difference in their implications. But what they both very much have in common is that we can see what you're going for, but it's not working on us. Right? That's this is again that sort of ContraPoint's theory of cringe. Like, I see that I would be embarrassed if I were you, but you don't understand that what you're doing is embarrassing. Right? I can see you having an emotion, but I'm not having it with you. And I think that's where most of this poem lives. But it's not without the potential for some real vital stuff here. You have to remember the slow blade penetrates the shield. And if you want to write lyric poems, not for your friends, not against your friends, but not only for your friends, only for your family, only for your journal. If you want to write lyric poems for strangers, then you have to be prepared to write for people who have their shields up and at full strength. You have to find a way to slip the Kindle in. The poem that I was most reminded of here, reading this poem, partly because of the image of the two boats, was poem 24 from Philip Larkin's first book. So his first book, The North Ship, is pretty widely considered a failure. Basically, the thought is like you can see he has some ability, he's developing something, but it just doesn't really work. It's sort of mawkish, it's sort of embarrassing. And it's in the second book, The Less Deceived, that we discover the fully formed Larkin. I mean, that first poem from The Less Deceived, Lines on a Young Lady's Photograph album, is just an absolute killer. I mean, that whole book is. The next three books, The Less Deceived, The Wits and Weddings, and High Windows, are all deadly, just killer start to finish. But the first book is a misfire. You know, it's basically juvenilia, though I don't think he was that young when he wrote it. But there's one poem from that first book that I quite like, and it's a close call. It's right on the edge of being, of singing with your eyes closed, of being embarrassing, being corny. You can see what he's going for. It's a close call as to whether he always gets away with it. But part of what I think is effective about this poem is that it's a frank, sad love poem, but it also has some self-awareness, and it is self-deprecating. And he cuts the caramel with salt. He cuts the queso with jalapeno. He lets us laugh at him. He laughs with us. And yet there is real sentiment here. It's a little bit arch, it's a little bit supercilious, but it's not cynical. He doesn't have his shields up all the way. So I thought I would read it because I thought it's not a bad model for this kind of poem. Now, it's not about the same thing exactly. It's not about being, in middle or older age and having a kind of a larger disappointment and compromise in your love life. It's about young love and something reaching a natural end. And it is, even if you know it's the end, it can still be painful. So this is poem 24. The whole first book is just, they're just numbered poems. I think there are a couple of titles. Yeah, a couple little titles, but mostly they're just numbered. So this is poem 24 from The North Ship by Philip Larkin. Love, we must part now. Do not let it be calamitous and bitter. In the past there has been too much moonlight and self-pity. Let us have done with it. For now, at last, never has sun more boldly paced the sky. Never were hearts more eager to be free, to kick down worlds, lash forests. You and I no longer hold them. We are husks that see the grain going forward to a different use. There is regret. Always there is regret. But it is better that our lives unloose, as two tall ships, wind-mastered, wet with light, break from an estuary with their courses set, and waving part, and waving drop from sight. You could, there are things you could point to. He starts the poem with an apostrophe to love. Love, we must part now. The first line, love, we must part now, do not let it be. Right? It's sort of, it feels like a high register that's a little bit corny, but it's even cutting against the meaning of the first half of the line. We have to, I can't go on, I must go on. We have to part, I don't want to part. But then the elaboration is, let's not make it ugly. Are there places of vulnerability where we could laugh at him if we wanted to? Yeah. Never were hearts more eager to be free, to kick down worlds? Lash force. You and I no longer hold them. Hold what exactly? Hold the worlds, hold the forests, hold the hearts. We never were hearts more eager to be free. You and I no longer hold them. It's a little bit of a confused image. We are husks. That sounds teenage, right? That sounds like adolescent angst. We are husks. There is regret. But he also balances these expressions with, sometimes overly dismissive self-mockery, but also with a truthful understanding that young people are a little bit ridiculous. Young people are a little bit self-romanticizing. And you're going to grow up and things are going to change. And that self-mockery gives him the liberty then to articulate this larger, more poignant simile at the end. How is it that your lives unloose? They unloose as two tall ships, wind-mastered, wet with light, break from an estuary. So yeah, I don't think this is a perfect poem. It is a poem I'm fond of. And it's interesting because it's not quite in the fully formed Larkin voice, but you hear the promise of it. And to me, that was the poem that felt like maybe the spiritual kin to The Four Ages of Love. Again, slightly different subject, but it felt like maybe a good model for balancing a plain-spoken voice speaking frankly about love with some highly developed imagery, even, maritime imagery, and I think a successful balance of tone that beguiles the reader, wins the reader over, recruits the reader into its perspective, and slips the Kindle in. And the last line, last few lines. I'll read it one more time and then I will sign off. This is poem 24 from the North Ship by Philip Larkin. Love, we must part now. Do not let it be calamitous and bitter. In the past, there has been too much moonlight and self-pity. Let us have done with it. For now, at last, never has sun more boldly paced the sky. Never were hearts more eager to be free, to kick down worlds, lash forests. You and I no longer hold them. We are husks that see the grain going forward to a different use. There is regret. Always there is regret. But it is better that our lives unloose, as two tall ships, wind-mastered, wet with light, break from an estuary with their courses set, and waving part, and waving drop from sight. All right, thank you very much to J and N for sending in your work, for bravely allowing me to speak about it in a listener crit episode. I am grateful to you. I'm grateful to all of you for listening. If you would like to have a poem discussed in a listener crit episode, go to SLEERICKETS.substack.com, sign up for the secret show, and send in a poem, 32 lines or less. I will skip the rest of my usual spiel about the secret show. You can listen to any other episode to hear it, or send me a note at sleerickets@gmail.com. And with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.